all to imagine that you're 5 years old again, and you're in the playground playing tag with your best friend, and you're running really, really fast, and your heart is pumping really hard, and blood is flowing through your body super fast to keep up with every movement. And as you're running, and you're about to tag your friend you trip on a rock, and boom, you fall on the ground, and your bare knee makes contact with the hard cement, and your knee starts to throb, and you go down with your hands and you clutch it, and it stings, and you look in your hands, and what do you see? But this crimson liquid oozing from your knee onto your hands. And as you wipe away the tears from your face, your little 5-year-old self thinks, what is that? And you're all probably thinking, it's blood. But really, what is blood? What is it in this blood that makes us so scared sometimes and evokes such fear in us? Well, if we take a closer look at our scraped knee and this crimson liquid that is flowing out of it, the first thing you'll probably notice is a whole bunch of red blood cells, or these red blobs. And these red blood cells have the very unique function of carrying oxygen all throughout our body, from our lungs to all the different cells in our body, keeping them alive. And you can kind of think of them as baskets of oxygen. And then if you shuffle through the red blood cells, you'll find very small cells called platelets. And these platelets, when they encounter a wound, become very sticky, and they begin to stick to one another as well as to other cells around it. And their job is to form a clot and form basically a natural Band-Aid to close up the wound. And then if you dig even more, you'll find a few rare cells called white blood cells. And these white blood cells have a very important job of keeping you healthy, of fighting off foreign invaders. So when you scrape your knee, bacteria or other types of pathogens are going to try to get in, but they will be met with resistance from these white blood cells. And so every day, we rely on all of these cell types to sustain life, to carry oxygen, to make sure we don't bleed out from a simple cut, to make sure we don't get sick. And believe it or not, our bodies make 500 billion blood cells every single day. That's crazy, right? Because 500 billion cells, that's more than twice the number of stars in our Milky Way. So how is it possible that our bodies can make 2 times the number of stars in our galaxy? Well, the answer to this question is actually pretty simple, and it is found in a very powerful single cell called a blood stem cell. And these blood stem cells are incredibly unique and rare in our body. And what we know is that they're able to create all of these different cell types that have very vast functions in our body, and they do this by many rounds of division. And if we track this blood stem cell, we can track it through each round of division. And at each division, it is required to make a decision, whether it makes this pink cell, or if it makes a green cell, or if this pink cell makes another pink cell, or a yellow cell. And as we track each round of division, we can create this roadmap of blood stem cell potential. And what we can see that it's incredibly complicated. And we have been fascinated by this process for many, many years. And this process of blood production from the blood stem cell to all of these cells that we find circulating in our body is called hematopoiesis. And hematopoiesis comes from the Greek words hema, which means blood, and the word poiesis, which means to produce something. So simply put, hematopoiesis is blood production. And it was actually Greek philosophers who used to think that the blood explains many of our traits, for example, our personalities. And although they didn't quite get it right, they ignited this fascination with blood production that has been around for many centuries. But it wasn't really until the invention of the microscope in the 1600s that for the first time scientists were able to observe what the blood is made of. And in 1678, Jan Swammerdam first recognized in the blood these red, globular, round particles. And he was probably actually looking at his own blood. And it made him think, where could these come from? It took another 200 years for other scientists to realize that we have inside our bones this area called the bone marrow. And then within the bone marrow, it was also observed that these blood cells exist, these red blobs exist. And this made them ponder and hypothesize that the bone marrow could potentially be the source of all of these blood cells, that potentially this is where all of these blood cells are made. And then roughly 100 years later, this question still was around. What is the bone marrow? What can it do? And so with the invention of transplantation experiments, for example, you're probably familiar with a heart transplant, where you take a heart from someone and put it into another person. Similar experiments were done with bone marrow, where we took the bone marrow from one person and put it into the bone marrow of another person. And surprise, the bone marrow from one person was able to generate all of the blood cells in this other person. So why? How is that possible? What is the special sauce, the secret ingredient in the bone marrow that gave rise to all of these blood cells? And another invention called flow cytometry allowed scientists to sift through all of these bone marrow cells and come across a very, very important cell, the blood stem cell. And from then, in the past 40 years, we've made incredible leaps with all of this technology to identify the different cells in this tree. And as you could probably realize, in this timeline of hematopoiesis research, is that every discovery was made with the invention of a new technology. Individually, all of these discoveries don't tell us much, but when we bring it together, we're able to build this tree. And what fascinates me so much about this blood tree is that these blood stem cells, these powerful cells, are different all throughout life. The blood stem cells that I had as a baby are different from the blood stem cells that I have now as an adult. And usually we think of babies, they're not very good at much, right? They can't talk really, they can't walk. However, their blood stem cells are very, very good at making white blood cells. And these blood stem cells from babies are very fast at making blood. And so, once again, the question is how? How is this possible? And this is something that has inspired me for the past 4 years while I'm doing my graduate work. What is it that controls blood stem cell function throughout life? And every day, this is a photo of me in the laboratory, but every day I get to go into the laboratory and think of ways to try to answer this question by designing experiments and doing them with my own two hands. And it's incredibly rewarding to be able to think and then do in the same day. And I'm not necessarily sure where my discoveries will fit in this timeline. I'm not necessarily sure what new discoveries will be made, but one thing I am sure of is that the people in this timeline will change. So maybe you've recognized that for a long time, that science has been dominated by a certain type of person, to put it in a nice way. But I want you to look around the room right now and appreciate the diversity of identities here. There are differences in gender, differences in race, differences in ethnicity. And so although we don't know what necessarily is going to come next in hematopoiesis research, one thing I am certain of is that every single one of you in this room is capable of contributing to the discovery of science. And so with every new discovery comes a new question, and I hope that with this you are inspired to pursue these questions, and I want to challenge you now to think of how will you discover something new, invent something new that is bigger than all of us. Thank you.